All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this evening. My name is Kim Levinsky, owner race director for Sasquatch Trail Runners. We put on trail parties in Northern New Jersey and the Hudson Highlands of New York. And tonight we are delighted to have Dr. Colleen Drahos leading this webinar about pelvic floor health. So Colleen just came on as an official Sasquatch partner sponsor, which is very exciting. She made her debut at the Squatch Apple Trail Party that happened just a couple weeks ago. Colleen is going to be sponsoring all of the menstrual products at all of our events, as well as the body wipes. And she pretty much elevated the menstrual product game like 10 notches from what we were doing before. So if you were at Squatch Apple, I'm sure you noticed next to the portable toilets, there was a table set up, and then these really fancy organized storage containers with I don't even know how many different products, probably at least 15, maybe
It was a
15,
lot.
20. It was a lot. And all of them are labeled in each of the separate compartments. It just like is a type A person's delight when you see that. So yes, Colleen is doing that. And then she's also sponsored some of the portable toilets at our events, which, my opinion, is great advertising, especially for a pelvic floor health professional. So I met Colleen 2018, probably, because I think you were around. Well, you just held up that swag from the early days of Sasquatch. So I'm pretty sure, yeah, she's got the retro silly pint. They don't make those anymore. And the coasters from the double squatch. So she's got some limited edition swag items. So we've known each other since 2018. Colleen is a very accomplished ultra runner. It is my personal goal to get her back on the trails a little bit more. But her wheelhouse is the fixed time events on a track. So she is one of those people that goes to the fairground every year and participates in the 24-hour, the 48-hour. Have you done 72?
I did. I haven't done a 48. I've done a 6 day.
The 6 day. Oh my God.
Very dumb.
And I had the pleasure of crewing Colleen once, and I remember like every time you came around the 1 mile, you're just like, this is so dumb. This is so dumb. Which
The
is
mantra.
spoken like a true ultra runner. But Colleen's become a great friend, and I took advantage of her services with Pelvic Floor Health last year or earlier this year. I don't even remember. It was recently. So I can speak firsthand that she is the best around, and I really benefited from the work that we did together. So I can give a full recommendation, and that's what we love to do at Sasquatch is partner with people and organizations that we know and trust. And Colleen is definitely one of those individuals. So this evening, we are going to turn it totally over to Colleen, and she is going to go through a really awesome presentation, which she'll do a little screen share. And I know she's kind of woven in a lot of the Q&A to her presentation. We'll address more specifically at the end. So there were a lot of questions, probably over 40 questions that came in. So I know she's going to do her best to address them all, but they probably all won't be answered. But Colleen will no doubt provide contact info afterwards. So anyway, I'll stop rambling, and we're going to turn it over to Colleen. So Colleen, thank you so much for leading the
All right. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm gonna do the whole screen share thing. Everybody bear with me for 1 second
You got
while we
this.
get that all set up. Da, 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 da. We practice this, so we make sure that it works well.
We did do a practice.
Okay, almost there. Okay.
Nailed it.
How are we looking?
We are ready to go.
All
Perfect.
right.
You got this.
Okay. All right, here we go. So thank you so much, Kim, and thank you so much for everyone who's here. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you guys coming out for this Wednesday evening to learn a little bit about running and your pelvic floor, and how those things are kind of interwoven, and how pelvic floor physical therapy can potentially help you with whatever your pelvic floor issue may be. So Kim gave me an excellent introduction, but I'm going to go a little bit more specific, I guess. So first things first, who am I? I'm Dr. Colleen Drahos. I don't wear a horse mask for our sessions, but I thought that could be a little fun, and you got to keep pelvic floor physical therapy a little light sometimes. But on a more serious note, I'm a licensed physical therapist. I specialize in pelvic floor conditions, especially for the runner. I work with a ton of runners, anywhere from people first getting into running to really advanced, ultra runners, sub elite, all that kind of good stuff. I basically treat adults of all genders. Everybody has a pelvic floor. I know people think that this is just kind of a women's problem, but it's not. Everyone's got a pelvic floor, and everybody needs a little bit of help sometimes. As far as my pelvic floor practice goes, I've been a physical therapist since 2016, and I started my own private practice back in 2021. What I primarily do is in-home physical therapy visits. I'm based out in Randolph, which is Western Morris County, and I serve about a 10-mile radius outside of Randolph. However, the really exciting news that I can finally share is that I will actually have an office space coming up in April. That'll be right in Randolph. So if you're outside of that service area, but you're like, oh man, I really need some pelvic floor PT, I'll be able to see you at my office in Randolph. So the other thing that I find is when I've treated a lot of my clients who are runners, maybe they've actually done pelvic floor PT before, but they've done it with someone who maybe doesn't get that as a runner. Like we're all a little bit crazy. So Kim gave me a good intro, but same thing. It's like, all right, cool. Like, do I even run? And yeah, I run a lot. It is basically my part-time job. I started on the trails probably in like 2007. I tried to look to see when like my first race was, but like it legit wasn't even recorded. But I started with half marathons, 50K. I have done some Sasquatch races back when I was doing trails, but it's been a while. Same thing like how Kim said, I was a little old school, so my favorite race that she ever put on was the Squatchy Surprise at Watchung, and I think she's bringing that back this year, but it's going to be, I think, at South Mountain. So that's a super fun race. If you haven't done it before, you should 1,000,000% sign up for it. But like Kim said, I am doing now the short loop races. I do 24-hour races, especially. That's what I love. I started doing those in 2015. And like I said, this is basically my part-time job. I'm trying really hard to get a spot on the US national team. And they do world championships every 2 years. This year, it's going to be in October in France. So I have one more try this qualifying cycle. So send me all your good vibes for my race in May. Trying to get on that team. Okay, enough about me. So what does a pelvic floor physical therapist treat? Like, what do we even do? There's a lot on this next slide here. This is like a short list. I know it looks like a lot of stuff, but I could have probably made like 4 more of these. So you can see on here like a whole variety of things, of diagnoses. The general idea, though, is that I can help with bladder issues, bowel issues, pelvic pain issues, and sexual function issues. So I tried to encompass a lot of that on this initial sheet. But you can see even things like low back pain, groin pain, hip pain, that kind of stuff is on there. Anything, like I said, bladder wise, so leakage, urgency, frequency, even bladder pain, those are things that I can help with. Menopause is having quite a moment right now, which is lovely and wonderful. But I can help with symptoms that we're dealing with in perimenopause and in menopause. There's a lot of, there's so much as far as like pelvic health goes that when our hormones start to shift, we need the best support that we can get, basically. A lot of people also think about, postpartum recovery, return to running after having a baby, people dealing with bowel issues like IBS, like constipation, pain with bowel movements. Another thing that's on there, you can see pelvic organ prolapse. And I think there was even a question about that came through. All of that can be helped with pelvic floor physical therapy. The other thing you might see on there is pre and post prostatectomy. So like I said, I treat all genders, and prostatectomies can happen after prostate cancer diagnosis. And those folks will have a lot of trouble with leakage, especially once they return to higher level activities. So yeah, that's a brief list, even though I know I just went into that in quite detail, but those are things that we can help with. All right, specifically, what do pelvic health issues look like in runners? So there's one of the porta potties that I sponsored, Squawk Apple. I had a nice little sign on there. But some of the specifics that you can think about is like I said, if you are trying to return to running postpartum, but you're like, oh man, I'm leaking 1 mile in, I'm leaking at 5K, like what the heck is going on? I used to be able to run a marathon with no problem. Are you someone who has mapped out where every porta potty is on your route, whether that's, I'm running around in town and I know the porta potties, or I know what bakery I can stop in and they're not going to kick me out because I'm in my running gear. They're actually going to let me use their toilet. Are you actually having to stop on the trail, like kind of urgently sometimes because you're like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen if I wait 1 more minute? Someone who has all these things planned out and you have that, urgency and frequency, we can figure out why and we can improve that significantly. Like I talked about previously, if you've had a prostate surgery and you're having trouble staying dry, we can figure out what the heck is going on with those muscles and we can improve that as well. Next up, like we talked about with perimenopause and menopause, like I said, it's having a moment. It's really big in, social media and everything right now. And I mean, when it comes to perimenopause or menopause, like stuff just gets weird. Stuff gets real weird, sometimes in a really not so great way. And we have to figure out what we can do about that. From a pelvic floor standpoint, there's a lot. There's also medical management. So we're not going to talk about the medical management side of things, but things that can happen that can be managed with physical therapies, like we can have such fatigue and it's basically like nervous system overload. So we can work on strategies to help to improve basically like the resilience in your system. GI issues. Oh my gosh. One day you're constipated. One day you have diarrhea. The next day you're like, I don't even know if I got everything out. I just feel terrible. Maybe you're even leaking a little bit. That can be one of the unfortunate hallmarks of perimenopause and menopause, and that can totally be improved. So maybe also you're someone who's actually never leaked when they've been running. Maybe even postpartum, you've never ever leaked. But now you're dealing with perimenopause, with menopause, and suddenly you're like, oh man, I'm doing a speed workout and I'm leaking. Or like when I run uphill, I'm fine. But when I come back down that hill, I'm leaking. Like, what is going on? We can fix that. So this is a fun one that some people don't necessarily know about, but chafing, okay, maybe you've never really chafed that bad before, or maybe your chafing has been just kind of like bra line chafing or like back of your shorts chafing or something. But there are changes that happen to our tissue, like if I'm not talking specific, so even like our labia, okay, that can start to change in perimenopause and menopause, and stuff can chafe worse. Super fun, just really fun stuff. But we can work on strategies to improve that as well. Not running related, but if sex is suddenly different, if you're like, man, I'm going through all the lube in my house, but something still isn't right, talk to me. We can figure it out. These are things that happen in perimenopause and menopause, and like we don't have to be silent about it anymore. We can figure out what's going on and we can improve it. So another thing, from an orthopedic standpoint, so like what if you had some tailbone injury like a long time ago, like you fell down the stairs, you fell off a horse when you were like 12, and like whenever you get into kind of like double digits with your running, your tailbone starts to hurt and you're like, what's going on? This doesn't make any sense. Maybe you're someone who has been diagnosed with like a high hamstring strain or something like piriformis syndrome, or you have this like deep, weird glute pain that you like can't quite put a finger on. Maybe you've like put a tennis ball in your butt and you've tried so many things, but nothing really helps. Those things can 1,000,000% be related to your pelvic floor. So you can see, even we're not going to go a ton into anatomy or anything, but you can see in this picture here, Your diaphragm's at the top. You can see all this musculature as it kind of goes down and connects even down into our lower leg and our foot. On this next slide, same thing, not going to go crazy into things, but you can see all these hip muscles. Okay, you can see the pelvic floor, the one that's the visual from down below. Those are your pelvic floor muscles. Everything through our pelvis, our low back, our hips, our glutes, it's so closely connected that our pelvic floor can unfortunately be the culprit for a lot of these things, especially if you've tried maybe PT, you've tried chiro, maybe you've even done like injections and it hasn't been fixed. I wonder if it's your pelvic floor. Okay. All right. That's our general intro. We're going to talk a little bit about running mechanics and why that is important to our pelvic floor. So, two main things that I want to talk about is how much our torso rotates and what's going on with our feet and our ankles as far as control and mobility. Okay, so if you look at that picture, it might be a little bit hard to see depending on how big your screen is. But if you look at everyone's shoulders in that picture, you can see that like one shoulder is a little bit more forward, one shoulder is a little bit more back, right? So that is torso rotation. When we're running, we need to have that rotation happening pretty equally to both sides. And if it doesn't happen, sometimes our pelvic floor can take up the slack, okay? And that can cause maybe too much pressure into the pelvis, maybe too much pressure on our bladder. Who knows, okay? That's what we have to figure out, right? The other thing is like the foot and ankle control and mobility. When we're running, our foot is the thing that's hitting the ground. So we need to be able to regulate that amount of force in the foot and ankle. That's the shock absorber. And if that's not doing the job it needs to do, where's that force going to go? It's going to travel up your system to your knee, to your hip, maybe to your pelvic floor. Okay. And I don't know if you guys know Meg Eckert, but that was a picture of us from Desert Solstice this past last year. She's amazing. I'm sure you guys know her from all like the backyard stuff, but I was fangirling when I was racing with her and she was phenomenal. Okay, so we're talking about torso rotation, we're talking about our feet, we're talking about our ankles. Like, what the heck? I thought you're a pelvic floor physical therapist. Aren't you only in the pelvis? The answer to that is no. Everything is connected. If you've done pelvic floor PT in the past and they've only looked at your pelvis, like, we can do better. Okay, we need to look at the whole system, the top, the bottom, all of it. So we're going to give everybody like a quick little break for a second. We're going to do a little bit of movement. So what I am curious about, two things. Okay, quick screen. So if we're thinking about that, torso rotation or your thoracic rotation, I would be interested to know, do you feel like you can rotate equally to each side? So how we're going to do this, if you're sitting, you can totally stay sitting. I just want your feet flat on the floor. If you're standing, you can stay standing. That's fine too. Whatever works. So just get yourself all situated. And then when you're ready, you're going to put your hands across your chest and you're just going to turn your body like you're trying to look behind you. Okay, so you're just going to turn to one side, then you're going to come back to center, and you're going to turn to the other side like you're trying to look behind. Okay, cool. So you're just going to try to do that rotation. If anyone has questions, I can totally like turn my camera on. Just let me know, Kim. But all you're trying to do is a nice little bit of rotation. And you're looking for a couple things. Is anything painful when you go to one side? Is there any asymmetry? Okay, can you go better to your right side than your left side? When you go to your left side, are you like, oh, like my rib just felt like it was going to cramp up or something? Does something just feel kind of stuck or kind of stuttery? Okay, if it does, then there's a chance that maybe that difficulty is making your pelvic floor either work too hard or not work enough when you're running. Okay, so that's looking at, your torso, your thorax. So other thing that you can try for me real quick, and number one rule for this is please don't fall over. Okay, so you're gonna stand up. We're gonna try to stand on one foot for 30 seconds. If you think you're gonna fall over, go next to a wall or like a dresser or something sturdy. Okay, but I want you to see if you can stand on one foot for 30 seconds without flailing your arms all over the place, without feeling like one hip kind of drops or you kind of shift way to one side. But can you do that? What does it feel like? Try that with one foot, see what you notice. Maybe you're hanging out there for like 7 seconds before it starts to get weird. Give it a little breather. Try your other foot. See if there's something different. So you did one foot, you try the other one. Is one easier? Do you notice that maybe you're gripping with your toes more on one side? Was there one side that, oh, when you went to stand on that, you really felt your hip kind of shift? Did standing on one side, hurt somewhere? Did it hurt in your glutes? Did it hurt in your low back? So I care about this because, and everyone can chill now, so you don't have to keep standing on one foot. Take a seat, stand, whatever the heck you want to do, but you can chill. So as runners, we care about these things. And these are just two of the things that I care about, right? But we should be able to rotate equally to each side in a pretty good amount, okay? And we should totally be able to stand on one foot for 30 seconds without looking like we're doing a crazy dance, okay? If we can't do that, then those things can impact our pelvic floor function, and it can lead to bladder issues, bowel issues, pain issues, etc. Okay. And these are the things that we can help you figure out, right? We need to know what is your deal. So maybe for someone, your feet are not the issue, but maybe up higher, maybe up in that rib cage, up in that torso, maybe that's where your issue is that's making your pelvic floor freak out. But the key is we have to figure it out and then craft like a truly individualized plan to solve your specific problem, because no one is the same, and it's going to be, everything is going to look different for each individual person. Okay. So I hope you guys got a little bit of movement in there, and you got to see maybe like, ooh, is something a little bit goofy on one side versus the other. All right. One of the cool questions that I got was like, what the heck is my pelvic floor even doing when I run? Okay. So it moves. Our pelvic floor is supposed to move. It's kind of like a trampoline. So it kind of moves a little bit up, it moves a little bit down. Literally, when you're just sitting here or standing, your pelvic floor should be going a little bit up and a little bit down because it works with our breathing, it works with our diaphragm. So it's always doing this nice little movement. And what I find a lot is, especially with someone who might have some leakage issues or some pain issues, that for whatever reason, maybe someone told them this, maybe they saw it like on Instagram, whatever, but for some reason, people think that they have to like hold their core in all the time. Just everyday life, when they're running, they're like, I gotta hold it in. I gotta keep my core tight. And if I don't keep my core tight, like something terrible is gonna happen. Like for most of you guys, if you're doing that, it's like we gotta learn to let it go. If we're just holding on too tight, then our pelvic floor doesn't have any options, and it needs to have options in order to function properly. So if you're someone who's like, I was told I got to keep my core tight all the time. I'm always ready. I'm always ready. Like someone's gonna punch me in the stomach, and I am so ready for that. It's like, no, we just gotta be a little chill sometimes. So that pelvic floor needs to move when we're running. Okay, it needs to move literally all the time. Okay. So some specifics. There's a lot of things that our pelvic floor is doing when we run. I could talk about this for like 5 years, but we're going to do a couple really, really basic things. So our pelvic floor responds to what our cadence is. So our cadence, that's like our footfalls, so right, left, right, left, right, left. And I'm sure a lot of you might know this, but our typical cadence should be about 180 right, left, right, left, right, left per minute, if not more. If you're at 180, you might be able to actually go up a little bit. If we're lower than 180, what that typically means is that we're actually taking too big of a step. So we're overstriding. And when we do that, it puts way more force on our pelvic floor. And that can lead to all sorts of fun stuff like leakage, like pressure, like heaviness after we run. Okay. So the cadence and the overstriding, those things are very connected. The other thing that you can think about when it comes to footfalls is like, are you loud? Are you a loud kind of foot slapper. Okay, what's going on if you were running on a paved trail? I know it can be hard sometimes if you're running on an actual trail, but if you're on paved trail, if you're on a treadmill, if you're on a track like crazy person like me, um, are your footfalls loud? Because if they're loud, then sometimes that shock absorption isn't happening. And then that's going to impact our pelvic floor and either make it work too hard or maybe it's going to inhibit it. Either way, it can lead to issues, whether that's, bladder, bowel, pain. Okay. And even if you're not having a pelvic floor specific issue, like a bladder issue, if you're having something even like low back pain, pain near like your pubic bone, remember that hip pain, that butt pain, that can all still be related to pelvic floor and to some of these variables. So the other thing, torso position. So what is our upper body doing when we're running? Is it super rigid? Like I just talked about with those people who kind of need to like let it go, okay? Are your shoulders up into your ears? Are you holding a ton of tension in your neck? Okay, what is happening there? Some people, even as they start to fatigue, they might kind of lean back or they might hunch over a lot. And those things, especially when we start to get tired, they show that maybe there's a little bit of weakness in the system. And physical therapy can help you identify those weaknesses so that your pelvic floor doesn't have to take up the slack. So if we're hunching over, maybe some stuff in the back of our body, needs a little bit better endurance. Maybe some of our spinal muscles, maybe some of our butt muscles, our hamstrings, maybe they need a little bit more help so our pelvic floor doesn't have to try to take up the slack. And of course, we talked about like the limited rotation. Okay. So the other thing, okay, foot strike. Oh gosh. This was like, I don't know how long ago it was big, but everyone was freaking out a while ago about, oh my gosh, heel strike is going to be death. Like if you do a heel strike, you're a terrible runner. Like why are you even bothering? This is going to cause you injury. You're never going to be able to do anything good. Like it was total freak out city, and everyone was like, midfoot strike, forefoot strike is where it's at. Luckily, we now know a little bit better. And we know that actually it doesn't matter so much where you strike on your foot, it matters where your foot strikes relative to the rest of your body. So if you are heel striking way out in front, it's almost like you're leaning back, and I'm exaggerating, but it's almost like you're leaning back and that foot's way out because you're overstriding and you're hitting with a heel strike, that might not be great. But as you can see in this picture here, so this is me. This was one of my fairgrounds races, and I'm pretty sure this was, oh gosh, this is a while ago. This was probably during the last hour of the race. I think something like 80 something miles or something in. And look, like I know this isn't the super perfect angle. It's not exactly from the side, but you can totally tell that I'm heel striking. Okay. I don't know exactly where that foot is relative to the rest of my body, but like 80 something miles in, I'm heel striking. And guess what? My pelvic floor was fine. I wasn't leaking. I wasn't having pain, nothing. Okay. So the foot strike sometimes doesn't hold as much power as we thought that maybe it used to. It just really matters where we're placing our foot. And there's things that we can work on, whether it's, certain drills, getting better mobility in our foot or our ankle or our knee or our hip, that can improve that. All right, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent because we had a wild question that like really just kind of hit me really hard. One of the questions that I got from the Zoom registration was, will continuing to train for ultra distances lead to irreversible incontinence? This was like a really heavy question. And whoever said that, if you're on the Zoom call, you don't have to like raise your hand or anything. But like, if someone told you that it does, then that person's wrong. And I just want to support you in knowing that like just training for these distances, training for any kind of running distances, it's not going to lead to anything irreversible. It's just that you might need help now, and the sooner that you get help, like the better. But training, running, all this kind of stuff, like we're made to move as human beings. So like it's not going to lead to irreversible incontinence. I just want you to know that. So here's my answer. um, You totally don't have to deal with incontinence and leaking when you're running, even if someone told you that, even if multiple people have told you that. If it was your gyno, if it was your primary care, if it was a run coach, whoever, okay? But we have to figure out why that's happening. And that's what pelvic floor physical therapy can do for you, because if you're leaking, it's going to be different than why I'm leaking or why Sue is leaking, right? We have to figure out why that's happening, and then we work to solve the problem. And physical therapy can get you a really, really long way in solving that problem. If not, get you 100% better. Okay, so that was my little soapbox. Sorry, I got like a little, I got a little emotional when I read that one. It made me just, ugh. Okay, another major question that I got was, how do you know if your pelvic floor is strong or if your pelvic floor is weak? This is such a loaded question. I could do another lecture for like hours on this, right? But I guess the take home for this is like, whatever your symptoms are, so say you get 5 miles into your run and maybe you start leaking, just that symptom in and of itself doesn't tell me if your pelvic floor is strong or weak. That is just one part of your story. And we need to look at the entire story. And that is your history, that is how your body's currently moving. It's so many things. So the symptoms don't tell everything. The only way to know if your pelvic floor is strong or weak is to do a pelvic floor evaluation. That's how you figure out all of the things that can be contributing. And like I said, that pelvic floor evaluation, for me, yeah, I'm looking at your pelvic floor, but I'm looking at your feet, I'm looking at your hips, I'm looking at your torso. I might even be looking at your shoulder or your neck, because oh my gosh, it is all connected. So, like I said, the leakage, and I'm sticking on leakage because this is just a primary one that people will ask about. But this could also be pain, right? Leakage can be from weakness. It can be from actually pelvic floor tightness. It can be from coordination issues. That's what we have to figure out, and that depends on so many other factors that each individual person is dealing with. When it comes to pain, too, pain can also be present in someone who has either a strong pelvic floor or a weak pelvic floor, or a tight pelvic floor or an uncoordinated pelvic floor. So I think you're probably seeing a little bit of a theme here, is like, it's a crappy answer, but the answer is it depends. And we need to evaluate you to figure it out. And honestly, if a pelvic floor physical therapist tells you otherwise, then I don't think they're doing their job. They need to evaluate you, and they need to evaluate you as a whole to know exactly what's going on and how they can best help you. This is absolutely not a cookie cutter approach. It can't be. Everybody is so different. Everybody has a different history. Some people have had kids, other people haven't had kids. Some people have had surgeries. Some people have underlying like comorbidities, like if someone has endometriosis. There's just a lot, okay? The only way that you're going to figure this out is you have to assess it. Otherwise, we're just guessing, and you all deserve better than just a guess. A guess is only going to get you so far. I can give you a good educated guess sometimes, but like, I could still be wrong. I could totally still be wrong until we figure out truly what that pelvic floor is doing. So everyone's like, all right, well, so how do you figure out what pelvic floor is doing? What does really good pelvic floor PT look like? So there are a lot of different philosophies. There are, we're all been trained a little bit differently. It depends, who mentored us. Obviously, I hope you guys can tell now that it has to be a whole body approach. Literally, like, I'm looking at how much your big toe can bend back, and that impacts your pelvic floor. Like, how weird, right? So you need to, in my opinion, you need to look at everything. It's absolutely not just Kegels. And there are times when Kegels are absolutely not even close to being appropriate. So I'll give you just a little tidbit of info. So if you have any sort of pelvic pain, so say you have pain with sex, say you have pain if you're using a tampon, if you're doing Kegels, I would highly recommend that you stop. Okay, so if you have any kind of pelvic pain, especially with any sort of insertion, Kegels are not your friend. Okay, so you want to take a break from that. So, okay, I'm gonna get back. Another big thing I know in this picture, I have this person on the table, but getting off of the table, seeing how your body moves, how it works, how it functions under load, how it functions dynamically. Running, like I literally do, like slow-mo video analysis of all of my runners because I need to see what the heck your system is doing. Um, the true full pelvic floor evaluation has a bunch of different components. So we have very, very specific and extensive training in being able to do all of this. So we're doing an external pelvic floor evaluation, which means we're looking at your system from the outside. We're also trained, especially in doing internal evaluations. So internal means going in through the vagina or in through the rectum and figuring out what the heck your pelvic floor muscles are doing, because you know what? That's where they live. So we have to figure out what's going on in those areas. Otherwise, we're just guessing. Okay. So you have to do those. If you've been to a pelvic floor PT and they're like, oh, I don't do internal, run. Okay. Or maybe don't run if you're having trouble running, but get out of there and call me. Okay. The other cool stuff that we can do is we can do standing assessments and we can do functional assessments. So standing, whenever I first introduce this to people, people are like, oh, that sounds like a little bit weird, but it gives us so much information. So we can literally do external and internal evaluations in standing and with functional movements. It tells us so much cool information, and it tells us truly what your pelvic floor is doing. Okay. Without that kind of information, again, we're just guessing, and our guess could totally be wrong. All right. Other thing that I think is a little bit special to me is that, like, I know this sport. I know running mechanics. I know how our system is loaded. So I have this pelvic floor knowledge and the knowledge of all sorts of running, right? I think the only runner that maybe I'd be like, oh, go find someone else is like, if you're a hurdler or something, I'm probably not your gal. I don't know specifics about hurdling. Um, but the big thing too is being able to progress people. So I've seen a lot of people who have been to different pelvic floor PTs. Maybe they've been in like hospital system or something, and they're a runner, right? And they want to get back to running, but they get, graduated from pelvic floor PT when they can run 1 mile, but they want to run a marathon. Okay. That's just letting that person plateau, and it's not progressing them. Like, you need someone who's going to be able to progress you through the demands of what your sport is. Um, I have one little quick story that I'll get into, but one of my favorite clients that I've worked with, maybe over last year or the year before, I forget when, but when I first started working with her, her biggest thing was that, like, she had two big things. She had this hip/butt pain that wouldn't go away. She went to chiro, she went to PT, she went to orthopedic specialists, she had injections done. Nothing helped. The other thing is that she had was leakage with, coughing, sneezing, running, jumping, running after her kids, that kind of stuff. So she ended up finding me. We did our pelvic floor evaluation, and we found a muscle in her pelvic floor that was the culprit. We found that muscle, and literally we put our finger on that muscle, and that was her pain. And she had been dealing with this for, I don't even know, almost a year, I want to say, before we started working together. So her goal when I first started working with her was like, she's like, I just want to maybe do a 5K without hurting. And yeah, cool. I want to like not leak too, but like she was a runner, all through college and stuff. She just wanted to be able to do a 5K. So we got her to be able to do a 5K. No pain, no leakage. Awesome. And she was like, hey, do you think I could do a 10K? I was like, heck yeah, like, let's get you there. Let's figure out, like, do we have a point in your system where we're starting to lose, control with leakage, or we're starting to have pain? Like, let's work you past that. So we were progressing. Okay. She ran her 10K. Then she got a little crazy and she was like, you know what? I totally want to do a marathon again. And like, I was just so psyched for her that she even thought like, hey, I can do a marathon again. She had been a marathoner, but she just didn't think that that was in the cards for her anymore. And holy cow, we got her through a marathon with no leakage and no pain. And it was just awesome. So I mean, that's what I mean, I guess, when I'm saying like progressing, not plateauing. So like your goals might start out a little bit small. And then when you realize like, oh wow, I have control over these things and I'm not dealing with this discomfort anymore, you can just go. Like it's amazing. Okay. So that was exciting. All right, so I'm just going to revisit this again one more time, and then we're going to go into a couple quick questions. Because like I said, I could talk about this for forever, but I don't want to keep you all day. So ways that you can work with me. So I said I do primarily in home around Randolph. I have that office in Randolph coming starting in early April, which will be primarily on Wednesdays, but I may have some other flexibility. I also offer telehealth in New Jersey, but like I said, that in-person stuff, like that's key, okay? And then virtual consultations for people who are out of state. As you can see, there's a QR code there that will bring you to my website that talks about, this, a lot of what we talked about today, but I have a program called Run Free. But basically it just goes over like, hey, what it's like to work with me and what we can help you with. Other ways that you can come and see me is going to be at a Sasquatch event. Like Kim talked about, I provide the menstrual products for all the Sasquatch races. I won't be at every race, but there's a chance that I'll be at, several of them in New Jersey. So if you see me, set up with my table and I have like a little banner and stuff, like come over, say hi, chat my ear off about pelvic floor stuff, like whatever, okay? All right. This. This was a huge question. This was probably the most questions that I had from just like the Zoom registration form. How to strengthen your pelvic floor. How do I keep my pelvic floor strong in menopause? How do I strengthen my pelvic floor postpartum? How do I make sure that my pelvic floor stays strong as I get older? How many pelvic floor exercises should I do every day? Or how often should I do pelvic floor exercises? I wish I could give you a straight answer for this. But the answer is you have to assess what the heck your pelvic floor is doing first. Otherwise, you're just guessing and you can make things worse. Okay. So, for example, say that I have leakage and I go to someone and they don't do a pelvic floor assessment, meaning they don't do an external or they don't do an internal. And they just tell me, you know what? You're going to start doing some Kegels. That's totally going to get you better. Do Kegels laying down, do 100 of them a day. But maybe they didn't ask me if I have any pelvic pain. Maybe they didn't ask me if I have pain with sex. And then I start doing those Kegels and my pain gets worse. Okay. We can't guess about what's going on. So strengthening the pelvic floor literally can look different for every single person. It's very individualized. We have to look at the entire system as a whole. It's not just doing Kegels. And like I said, those Kegels are not for everybody. They can legit make things worse. So I know that's kind of a crappy answer to the whole, like, how do we strengthen our pelvic floor? One of the things that I was thinking too was like, oh, if you guys liked this and then Kim wanted to have me back, like we could dive into this a little bit more. But remember, it's still going to be a little bit of a guess without assessing what is happening. But moral of the story is you've got to figure out what's going on. It's way beyond Kegels. And if you have any sort of pelvic pain right now, I would highly recommend, if you're doing some variation of Kegels, I would stop. Okay. There were a couple other questions that were very specific that are kind of outside the scope of this talk, but I did just want to mention briefly, okay? So someone asked about reducing the risk of pelvic organ prolapse. So whether this was, in the future or, prevented from coming back after having a surgery. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that we can do to reduce the risk, but one of the big ones is managing constipation and making sure that you have a great bowel movement pretty much every day. No straining, you feel like you empty well. It's a satisfying bowel movement. You're like, that was great. You want to make sure that that is happening. We're not sitting there straining. We're not sitting on the toilet until our legs go numb. We are not sitting there, scrolling on our phone, waiting for something good to happen. Those things you want to make sure of, okay? We talked a little bit about menopause, but the biggest thing to look out for this is like there are hormonal impacts on our pelvic floor muscles, on, you know, the vulvar tissue, on the vaginal tissue. There are hormonal impacts on those tissues that can be regulated both with medical management, which is incredibly important, and then with pelvic floor physical therapy as an adjunct. Okay. Someone also asked about urge incontinence. So urge incontinence is basically like, oh my gosh, I was just maybe, for example, I was, you know, driving home from my trail run. I feel totally fine. You know, maybe I peed before I left the trailhead. There was a porta potty this time, and I pull into my driveway, and as soon as I get to my front door, oh my gosh, I feel like I have to pee and I have to run to the bathroom. And even sometimes maybe I don't make it there. Okay, maybe you leak a little bit on the way. We have to figure out why that's happening. There are a whole bunch of different reasons why, but we can totally retrain your system when it comes to urge incontinence. And then a couple more specific diagnoses. Someone mentioned interstitial cystitis. So this is basically like a bladder pain syndrome is another word for it. All I'm going to say about that is whoever you are that mentioned that, you should totally contact me. I see a lot of people with IC, and pelvic floor physical therapy is the #1 treatment for interstitial cystitis. Osteitis pubis is another thing that someone mentioned. This can happen, you know, after an injury. It can happen after labor and delivery. We can't get into this now, but honestly, there's a lot of anatomy that, you know, pelvic floor wise, inner thigh wise, glute wise, that attaches to basically pubic bone area. And we have to figure out what those muscles are doing, and we can totally fix that too and make that improved. Last thing that I want to mention, someone talked about pelvic floor muscles and anxiety. So there's a huge link with our pelvic floor and having more tension in our pelvic floor in those people who have maybe higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of depression, higher levels of stress. So our pelvic floor responds to those things and typically responds to it in a tensioning way, in a tightening way. Okay, so if you're someone who has, you know, anxiety, has a lot of stress, and you're doing a ton of Kegels, maybe that's not what you should be doing. But we don't know, right? Until we assess it. There were other questions from Zoom. So if there are people who are on here, as soon as I finish this, if you're like, oh, you didn't answer my question, you can totally ask it. It's totally fine. So overall, I want to say thank you so much to Kim. Thank you so much to SAS Squad. You guys are great. I really appreciate all the questions. I really appreciate you guys spending some time with me. You'll see there's another QR code there. It just takes you to my website. But I would really love to chat with any of you about any questions, concerns, etc. But I'd love to help you. Really, you know, we can work together and help you find freedom from whatever pelvic floor problems that you're dealing with. Yay. Okay, so hang on. I'm going to make sure that I can remember how to stop my screen share. Give me a sec. Okay. How are we looking there, Kim?
You got it.
Okay, we're good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yay.
Colleen, that was
Okay.
awesome. That was great.
Yay. Thanks everybody for hanging out. I'm going to take a sip of water now.
Well, I wanted to throw in that if anybody's on the fence about reaching out to Colleen, because maybe like myself, you're like, pelvic floor health. I don't know what is exam gonna entail. It's worth it. You know, I kind of came to the point where I was like, you can either live in pain or get help. So, and it was amazing how kind of little we had to do in order to relieve the pain that I was having. So, just wanted to throw that out there. If anybody's listening and you're kind of like, I don't know if I should reach out or not, I'd encourage you to do so. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and jump in.
I was just going to add that I had pelvic floor therapy a couple, like, I don't know, 6 years ago, 8 years ago. It took that, like my son was already like 6 or something, to find someone who did it. And it was really helpful. So I may still be visiting you again. I recognize some things that you mentioned, but like it was really helpful. Internal, external, the whole thing happened, but it really was helpful. It was too bad that it just took that long to find someone. So it's good that we have you now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you're right, like there's more pelvic floor PTs now, but there's still not enough of us. Everybody's got a pelvis. You can find, an orthopedic PT. You throw a rock and you can find an orthopedic PT. When it comes to pelvic floor, it's hard to find. We have a lot of specialized training, and not everybody does what we do. So I'm glad that you had a good experience. But yeah, if you notice anything, by all means, reach out. Thank you.
Yeah, it's something
Right,
I've heard, Colleen, I've heard you say a few times in passing or in person or whatever, is that something may be very common, but it's not normal. And you can't really find that out unless you ask. So again, another thing, like if you're wondering if something you're experiencing is like, is this okay or not? Just encourage you to reach out to Colleen and ask.
Yeah.
Get some help.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And, I think one of the most obvious areas where I'll find that is people think, basically, oh, like once I've had a baby, this is just how it is. I'm just, especially for leakage, I'm just gonna be leaking. Like this is just what it is. If I cough, if I sneeze, if I run, if I go to the trampoline park with my kids, I'm just gonna leak. And this is just what happens to everyone once they've had a baby. It happens to a lot of people, but you don't have to stay like that. Like we can work on things to improve whatever the heck is going on with your pelvic floor, with your bladder, etc. So yeah, common but not normal, for sure.
All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, we can wrap up here. Colleen, you already gave out your contact info because I like to do that at the end, but thank you again for leading this webinar.
Yes, you're very welcome. So yeah, you can check out the QR code that has, my website is just drahospt.com. You'll see my contact info and everything on there. There's a contact form. Like I said, we got to the tip of the iceberg about stuff today. And this was a very general introduction to am I having a pelvic floor issue? And oh wow, something can be done about it, okay? Because a lot of runners have pelvic floor issues. You guys, you're not alone and you don't have to deal with whatever the heck you're dealing with. So I appreciate, the opportunity to come talk to you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll hope to catch you out on the trails sometime soon. Until then, keep it squatchy.
Thanks, Kim.